Hey everybody, Kulprit. Oh my gosh, he's still alive. D here, and it's time for an album review. Even though it's been a year since I've done one, of the new Walk the Moon album. Talking is Hard, and in this video, I'm going to have Hipster Dakota help me out with this one. Hipster Dakota, thoughts on the new album from Walk the Moon, the indie band Walk the Moon? Have you? Yeah, they're an indie band that is signed to RCA Records, one of the biggest and most corporate labels in the world. Yeah, no, indie. That makes sense. Shut up. Debuted a few years ago with their self-titled album, gained quite a bit of a fan base and some notoriety due to the single that was spawned off that album, Anna Sun, that kind of launched them into the eye of listeners of this particular genre. Now, I have not heard any songs from the previous Walk the Moon album. This Talking is Hard album is the first thing that I've ever listened to by them. I was introduced to this band via my friend because of the Shut Up and Dance video, and thought it was a very catchy and appealing song. And normally mainstream music, not my thing, but this caught my attention a little bit. But from what I understand, the sound of this Talking is Hard album, not totally on the opposite end of the spectrum, but sonically very different from their usual style. I'll say that. Right now in music, there is an air of nostalgia with so many different artists. People trying to capture sounds of the mid-90s and of the mid and late 80s, and some contemporary pop and R&B artists trying to capture soft rock and jazz R&B sounds of the mid and late 70s. And this is very cool, but it's a double-edged sword. There are a lot of artists making some creative, fun songs, but there are also some artists that are just blatantly stealing ideas that have already been done and done even better. For example, Mark Ronson and Bruno Mars, Uptown Funk, which blatantly rips off people like Rick James and George Clinton, and we all know the story with Blurred Lines and Robin Thicke that came out a couple years ago. So it's hard right now to take the time to weed out who is influenced and who is emulating and who is just being a copycat and ripping off other artists. I say that to preface this. The new Walk the Moon album has is just riddled with 80s influences, mostly new wave, some mainstream rock, even some pop rock. You hear influences like Duran Duran and Devo and A Flock of Seagulls and The Cure, The Outfield, Eddie Money, Loverboy, and dare I say even Richard Marx and sans Commodore Lionel Richie on some of the slower, stripped-down tracks. However, I think Walk the Moon with this album transcends emulation and transcends just carbon copying, and really, in all honesty, is borderline brilliant in the way they do this with some of the production choices. It instead of sounding influenced, it sounds like something from an 80s album. Had you told me this was done by this 80s band, I would tend to believe you, because it sounds so authentic and so amazing. And we hear that in some of the songs on this album, like Avalanche, which is a fun dance pop kind of song. You also have songs like Down in the Dumps and What Do You Spend Your Money On that have that 80s influence on it as well. And and the closing track on this album, Aquaman, which is the best song I think I've ever heard in the past year. I would have spent the $9 I paid for this album just for this song alone. If you don't listen to any other song from this album, just listen to this one and be amazed at the circa 86 sound that they capture here so well. However, Walk the Moon does have some songs on the album that have a little bit more of that contemporary sound that you would expect to hear in the indie rock landscape right now, such as the opening track. Also, some of the slower tracks like We Are the Kids and Under the Covers have more of a modern indie rock feel, as well as the song Portugal, which just uses this lo-fi, brassy synth pad, and just there's so much going on, and it's so cacophonous, and the melody kind of gets drowned out the first time you listen to it, but once you find it, it's beautiful. Oh, it's beautiful. So there's a little bit of the old with some of the influence I mentioned earlier, and then there's also some new sound in there that fans of Coldplay or the Bravery or the Killers might be a fan of somewhat. And as far as musical composition, Walk the Moon, they were not dealt a shorthand in the area of musical talent, composition talent. They come up with just great arrangements for these songs. They also come up with very catchy hooks and counter melodies. I think I've listened to the album probably 6-7 times, but I think after the first 2 listens, I had memorized all the choruses from pretty much every song. They just have a knack for writing really earworm hooks, and along with Nicholas's voice, the lead singer, being accompanied by piano or synth doing the same notes, really helps it become a very memorable thing. So I will say, musically, songwriting, they do a lot, and they put a lot into it. The only area where this album kind of falls short, I think, would be lyrical content. There are some very good themes and some very common themes as well, of course, that you would expect to hear in this mainstream of an album and in this type of genre of synth pop and indie pop and things like that. But some of the themes and motifs, they could have varied on them a little bit more than they did. There were some ideas that tended to be recycled, and some, I think, even a couple lines that were recycled in different songs. So I think, as far as lyrically songwriting, that's the only area where this album really does fall short. Well, what you could do is review the new Mumford & Sons album. Once you do that, then I might actually subscribe to your channel. But I wouldn't enjoy the album at all if that were the case. The Taylor Swift shrine behind you, good touch, makes it look like you know so much about decent music. You hush. But yeah, that's just my thoughts on the album. And normally I don't review something this commercial, but I think this band really needs to be given a chance if they haven't already. They're gaining quite a following with this new album, and it's really, I think this band has the potential to be pushed into superstardom, or as much as they can be in their field, their genre of music. So overall, I think the Talking is Hard album definitely, I don't know. Okay, I'll say it. I'm feeling a 4 out of 5 moons on this one. So, kudos to Walk the Moon. Thank you guys for watching this. I will have more reviews posted. If you enjoyed this album, another one I would recommend, but don't think it's I don't have the time to review it, is the new Night Terrors of 1927 album, Dust and Bones. If you like kind of this indie rock with a very 80s new wave influence, I would also check out this Night Terrors album. You would enjoy that one too. Thank you guys. Talk to you later. Stay tuned. Also check out the Kulprit D Hour, the new internet radio show that I'm doing with a couple of my friends. I'll post a link in the description box. So, peace.